Hello everyone, welcome to my data analytics channel. I'm Richmond Owusu, and I'm excited to have you with me here today. Today's section is an introduction to data analytics, and we are going to be talking about data, information, the differences between data and information, the data life cycle, sources of data, and how to evaluate your sources. If you are excited, then let's start. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also like my page. Thank you. Now, first of all, let us look at what data is. Most often, people tend to interchange data for information and vice versa. But we can simply say data refers to facts and statistics that are collected for analysis. Data could come in several forms. Data could come in the form of a boolean, which are logical statements that are represented as true or false. Data could come in a form of a text, or it could come in a form of numbers. Now, most often, these are the types of data that are stored in tabular formats. But however, data could also come in the form of images. Data could also come in the form of videos and then also sounds. Now, this type of data is mostly stored in the database as binary large formats. Now, let's look at what information is. And we could simply say information refers to data that has been processed or data that has been organized. Information is very important to every organization. First of all, information is obtained from data. Information also helps an organization make decisions according to the company's objectives, and most often information is presented in the form of reports, in the form of charts, and then also in the form of graphs. Now let's take a critical look at the differences between data and information. First of all, data is mostly raw and organized. However, information is data that has been structured or data that has been cleaned. Also, data cannot be used to make decisions because it is raw. But however, information on the other hand could be used in making decisions. Also, data on its own do not make any meaning. It's very difficult to understand data on its own. But once it has been cleaned and transformed and processed, then we could make a lot of meaning out of it. And then lastly, data contains all the elements needed for analysis or needed to make a decision. But unless it has been processed into information, data is just meaningless. So we could simply say that information is processed data, whilst data is unprocessed information. Now, let's move on and let's look at the data life cycle. As a data analyst, we are supposed to be aware of what data goes through right from the stage that data is collected through to the last stage where the data is destroyed. The first stage in the data life cycle is to collect the data. And at this stage, we collect the data from various sources. The sources could either be a primary source or a secondary source, and we will look at the sources of data in the next slides. After the data has been collected, the next thing is to store the data. And when storing the data, we need to store it in a secure location that could be accessed by only authorized persons and also needs to be stored in a place that users or authorized users can easily have access to it. Now, the third stage in the data life cycle is data processing, and it is at this stage that the data is cleaned and transformed into information. So it is at this stage that the data can now be used for statistical analysis. The fourth stage is data visualization, where we now transform the data or the information that we have into charts or into graphs for easier understanding. The fifth stage is data dissemination, and at this stage, we communicate the data to the relevant stakeholders. The sixth stage is to archive the data, where we now store the data at a permanent place for a long term. After some time, when the data is no longer in use or when the data is out of date, this is the last stage where we destroy the data. And in the destruction of the data, it needs to be done in accordance with the industry's laid down standards or the laid down requirements. This explains that every industry has its own laid down requirements that you need to follow when it comes to data extraction. So, as a data analyst, depending on the industry where you would find yourself, or depending on the industry where you are operating, you need to be able to have a fair idea of their requirements in order for you to know how to destroy the data. Now, let's move on and let's look at the sources of data. Because we said the first stage in the data lifecycle is data collection, it tells us that data collection is at the source of data analysis. There are two main sources of data. Data could be obtained from a primary source, which is first-hand data, which is data that has never existed, which is data that has been collected by the data analyst or the researcher by himself or herself. This data is obtained through interviews. This data can be obtained through questionnaires. This data can be obtained through surveys. This data can be obtained from the company's current sales or the company's current financial transactions. The next source of data is a secondary source, and this is data that has already existed. So secondary data could be obtained from trusted websites, it could be obtained from journals, it could be obtained from government publications, it could be obtained from other research database or other research publications. The main difference between the primary source and the secondary source is that the primary data has never existed. However, the secondary data has already or is already in existence. Now, regardless of the source of data that we would be using, as a data analyst, one of our jobs is to evaluate the data and make sure that we are collecting data from the right source. In evaluating data, we use the CRAP framework to evaluate the data. And the CRAP framework stands for currency, it stands for relevance, it stands for authority, accuracy, and the last one is purpose. Now, when we take a look at currency, we are looking at how new the data is. We are trying to find out whether the data is new, or if the data is an old data, we want to find out if the data is up to date, or even if it is an old data, we want to know whether the data is completely out of date and cannot be used. The next thing is to examine the data, the source for relevance. And here we are looking at the importance of the data to the user. This will help us not to collect any type of information at all or any type of data at all. The next third thing is to look at the authority, and then we are supposed to look at the source of the data. When collecting data, we are supposed to try our best and collect data from a recognized source. In some instances, when we are dealing with data, we need to also state the source from which we obtained our data from, and that is authority. The fourth is accuracy, and then here we are examining the authenticity of the data, while the last one is purpose, and with purpose we are trying to examine the intended use of the data. So this is the CRAP framework that we use in analyzing our data. So this is an introduction. Thank you for your audience, and don't forget to like and follow my channel for other resources that will be posted to this channel. Don't forget to leave your comment behind. Thank you.